Welcome to Ceasefire, where civics meets civility and engagement meets empowerment. Ceasefire is hosted by former Boerne ISD trustee and owner of the Boerne Bookshop, Dale Adams, and by former Boerne City Council member and local insurance agent, Ron Cisneros. Ready, aim, ceasefire.
Good morning, Kendall County. This is Ceasefire. My name is Dale Adams.
And I'm Ron Cisneros.
And today we're going to talk about something that we all see once in a while, and it's when is censorship okay? And do we actually see it when we think we see it? That's a good question, I think.
I can answer that question pretty quick, and then we can go home. Yeah, we can finish the show.
No.
It is perfectly okay when you're a parent and your kids are nagging on you, and you just tell them, look, shut up.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly okay.
Okay, there you have it. Permission from Ron. You
Yep.
can tell your kids to be quiet and not say certain things.
All right,
So,
well, that's a wrap. Thank you, Boerne.
Okay, but sometimes our government tries to do that to us, and we aren't their children, and sometimes we push back and we think, you know what, I want to say something.
Right.
I got something to say.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't want us to say it. And it's happened a little bit under a couple of administrations now that we wonder, what's going on there.
Yeah. So let's start with one that we all remember too well, and then we'll dive into some recent events. But let's go back to COVID and the Biden administration's attempt to suppress, or basically they went out to social media and they were telling Twitter and Facebook, and hey, if you see anything contrary to what we believe, contrary to wearing masks, contrary to our protocols, contrary to the vaccine information, in the interest of the public good, we'd like for you not to show that information.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
For me, the key is who does it. And in that case, honestly, it was a private company that did it. But it was sort of at the request of the government, and that's sort of where I see the gray area. Was it coerced? Or these people at Google that just said, yeah, I want to do that? And I don't know the answer to that because I didn't do that deep of research. Maybe you did.
Well, I did, and so the request did come from the government, and we were talking about private companies like Google and Facebook, and they were willing accomplices in this, and they had the keys, right?
Right.
Ultimately, they were the ones that decided to comply, but was there any coercion?
No.
Did Facebook feel like, well, I really don't want to get this administration mad, maybe they can come back and make my life difficult? And it was interesting once we changed administrations that you see some of those same figures sitting in DC at the inauguration and trying to make, buddies with the new president. And certainly he's done a little bit of that too now that he's in office.
I think when the government says something, it's different than when a private party says something.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if it's just a suggestion or a desire, it still has the backing of the government. And the government is the controller of a police force. I mean, it controls, it decides what we can and can't do. And so we always have to be polite to the government. So if a policeman pulls you over, you should be polite. You don't want him to start thinking that something's funny going on. So our relations with our government is different than our relations with private parties. And so the government needs to recognize that and realize that what it says is different than what a private party says. And so it should refrain from saying, oh, I'd love for you to do this or that, even if it's not overt coercion, because there's always the underlying principle that the government rules you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't necessarily see fault on the part of Google, specifically for that maybe, but I do see fault on the part of the government from making suggestions, because those suggestions are never just without any force behind it, because everything the government does has some force behind it.
Right. So let's talk about a recent example that involves the current administration. And in this case, right after Charlie Kirk's assassination, Jimmy Kimmel made some not so nice comments, and Brendan Carr, who is the current chair of the FCC, made some threats. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, they were threats, hey, if you don't pull him, you might lose your license. This is him talking to ABC.
And that's overt. That's an overt coercion.
I mean, that's a lot stronger than the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And look, I want everybody to know right now, I'm not anti-Trump, right? I'm a Republican. So let's clear that up. But Biden's administration went to Facebook, went to Twitter, went to all these social media sites and said, pretty please kind of hold back that information a little bit. And so there was something a little more subtle about it. Still not right in my mind, but a little subtle. This is an outright like, hey, we might be pulling your license if you don't pull him.
Yeah. But now it also needs to be remembered that it's easier to give subtle instructions to somebody who fawns over you. Mm-hmm. And I think under the Biden administration, a lot of the social media companies were fawning over the government. They don't now.
Oh, that's a great point.
They're much more resistant, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And the Trump administration has its own personality also. Both situations, I think, were wrong. If we're going to talk about the specifically Jimmy Kimmel issue, and he's back, you can look deeper to this. He had declining audience. He was actually up for contract renewal. Mm-hmm. And I can easily see ABC saying, gosh, Kimmel, why don't you take a little break and then we'll discuss your contract again. Now, I don't know what's going to happen or what happened with his contract, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he had to make some concessions and stuff because he's not as desirable as he used to be.
Right. Yeah, you're correct, first off, that his numbers are low. They're incredibly low. So I think that a lot of this was them trying to get rid of him and blame it on the Trump administration,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. And I think that ultimately, in a situation like this, it's best to just let the customer decide. Were Kimmel's comments offensive? Yes. Okay. Turn off the television set.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of the affiliates did that.
Yeah.
There are some affiliates that didn't put them back on right away.
Right.
And that's the customer in that world.
And his numbers are so small anyway that if all of us had ignored him like we were doing prior to his comments, we wouldn't even know about it. But a guy who, I don't even know how he gets so much airplay. We like to get angry about stuff.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's why we hear from all these people that shouldn't have any airplay at all. I mean, we constantly hear about who gets offended by who. And it's both sides that are doing it now. They're seeking out opportunities to be offended and be outraged, and because they get traction with that. And it's frustrating. I wish we'd never hear about the offensive people.
So, bunny trail here, and then I'll get us back on.
This isn't a bunny trail?
Yeah, this is no. What I'm about to ask is a bunny trail.
Oh, no.
So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said, the FCC belongs to the government, and they should only do things that are in the public interest, and so we should kick Kimmel off the air. And I thought, well, who owns the government? We do. So it's really our airwaves. Should we have... Obviously, we need somebody in government to facilitate that, like they facilitate the highways and the military and whatnot. But should we even have an FCC?
We should be bearing on this. For starters, the FCC is not the airwaves. They're separate. The FCC is an organization. The airwaves, basically that's the right to broadcast on a particular frequency in a particular area. But if I'm not mistaken, the broadcasters own that territory. Is that right?
I know nothing.
Oh, okay. So my understanding is that they buy these. Now, maybe it's more of a lease or something like that. But my understanding is that these broadcasters own the airwaves, in which case it's somewhat like private property, and they should be able to do whatever they want with it.
Yeah. Boerne, are you afraid that you're going to get a phone call later on?
I don't think they're listening to this show.
No.
I shouldn't have said
that. In a digital world, every word you say, though, it can be traced.
Good point. Yeah.
But
goodness.
I'll just say that I do pay regulatory fees. I do have to pay for my license. I have to protect my license. And so they have expectations for you to protect your license, but what comes out of your speakers. I have to do a quarterly report to the FCC that says, hey, and I use this show a lot to justify this station. Here's what we're doing in the community. Here's the topics that we're talking about, First Amendment rights, et cetera, all the great things you guys talk about. So I do report, I do respect, and I need them to love me.
Yeah. So if you don't do that, they'll take
Correct.
it away. So it's more like
if you get
a lease and a permission rather than ownership of the airwaves.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they provide the license.
I see.
And if someone wants to complain about a radio station, they'll complain to the FCC, and then they'll do an investigation. Hey, I don't like what those guys said.
Instead of just coming to you and say, hey.
No, they'll call the FCC, and then you've got to answer. And lawyers get involved.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the government does own the airways, I guess.
I guess so.
Oh, well. Darn.
That's good information.
Yeah, and with the airwaves, that includes CB radio, that includes the Kendall County Police Department using the radio channels to communicate, fire department, all those things.
So that's all permissions by the government then. Okay. I got to think about a way around that. Okay. I guess streaming is sort of ownership, but yeah. Okay. Let's take a quick break. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, and we're going to come back and we're going to dive into more of this and go in some new directions also.
Okay.
Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Bookshop, and we pride ourselves on finding what you're looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Bookshop. Welcome back to Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, and I interrupted Ron. He had a thought going, and where were you going?
Well, I want to get off the airwaves for a second and talk about businesses. And this is tied into free speech. Let's talk about freedom of religion for a moment, because both of those are in the First Amendment. And I want to bring us back to a case. I'm forgetting the year. I want to say it was 2017, may have been 2018. Actually, I think it's even older. And it's a fellow by the name of Jack Phillips. He was a baker in Colorado, or is a baker in Colorado. And he was asked to bake a cake for a gay wedding, and he chose not to do it. He was sued. He was in violation of some Colorado state law and civil rights, and they prosecuted him. And this worked its way up to the Supreme Court, and it's Masterpiece Cakes versus state of Colorado, something like that. I don't remember. And eventually he prevailed. And they basically said that not just a freedom of religion, but a freedom of speech issue, that he was exercising that, and the state could not compel him to bake a cake for a gay wedding.
I'll tell you what bothered me about that is not so much the freedom of speech issue, because I think that was used as a tool to achieve his freedom, but it's a freedom of action. I mean, we should be able to do what we want if we're not hurting another person. Now, that's not enshrined in the Constitution or any law, but essentially he was being told to do something, to create some product. And he decided, you know what, I don't want to do that one. Well, he should be allowed to say that. And I think tying it up with the civil rights, the constitutional rights and a lot of the civil rights to gear around government operations and what governments can and can't do. And I think we get into murky territory when we start saying civil rights laws and whatnot apply to private citizens and what they do. Because then you end up with things like this where, everybody has to serve every other group no matter what they think of that group, or you have to have exactly the right percentage of friends of different racial groups or something like that. I mean, you can go anywhere with that. And so it bothers me when we apply all these civil rights directives to private entities and to people. So that's my view on that.
And I agree with you. So now let me throw another case at you that's a similar case, but again, more modern times. After the Charlie Kirk assassination, there was a young man setting up a memorial event, and he went to an Office Depot and asked them to print some flyers so he could distribute them. The employees at the Office Depot said no. They said it was basically hate propaganda, and they didn't want to do it. So this guy took to the internet, and it got blasted, went viral, and then AG Pam Bondi got involved and said it was discriminatory and she was going to go after these businesses.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, now wait a second.
Yeah.
Now, there's a difference here, and I want some distinctions, and I want to go ahead and talk about those. In the Masterpiece Cake situation, it was the business owner who made the decision.
Right.
In the Office Depot case, it was some employees who made the decision. Office Depot came back and said, no, we're going to print those for free. We're sorry about that. It won't happen again. And they terminated those employees. And that, I
think that's the right thing.
I think that's the right thing. And Office Depot owns the company. They get to ultimately decide.
Yeah.
But had Office Depot defended those employees, I still think that would have been the right decision because it's Office Depot's company.
Exactly.
They get to decide what they want to print.
Yeah.
And I think that, despite my political leanings, I think that our current administration was an error in making that call, and that the AG has got better things to prosecute than some angry Office Depot employees who don't want to print Charlie Kirk Memorial.
Right. They don't want to make money.
Right.
Yeah. I do think a lot of this comes from past. Like, I think a lot of it comes from the wedding cake thing. It happened, and people were outraged on both sides, and it got dragged on for a long time. And I think this is, I hate to say this, but I think it's almost sort of a payback reaction. Saying, well, they did it, so now we're going to do it. And that's frustrating. I don't like seeing that, and I think we're getting more and more of that pushback is becoming, we're going to take on your tactics. My goal would be to say, okay, everybody's going to just let everybody get along and live. Rodney King said, can't we all just get along? Was it Rodney King that said that? Yeah. Can't we just get along? And I wish both sides could realize that, but I think we're past that. I think we're into retaliatory mode, and that's happening all over the place. Unfortunately, I think it's going to go farther. A possible silver lining is it may come to a point where both sides step back and say, whoa, okay, let's all adhere to what the Bill of Rights says, and we'll just stick with that.
Right.
So,
we could walk this really far back if we had a time machine and say, well, let's apply that same thought process to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And are we willing to say then that, well, okay, if a business doesn't want to serve people because of their skin color, is that correct? I mean, at what point do we say, okay, you cannot discriminate in this particular situation that you can, because that's what we're saying is that certain skin color you can't discriminate against, or any skin color, but you can discriminate against a gay couple because
ideology or whatever you want to call it. It's murky territory when you start applying civil rights to the private sector. I think I don't have a pat answer for that. If you go back to the civil rights era and the whole different restaurants can cater to different people, I didn't grow up in that, so I don't remember the specific experiences. But I would like to think that if the government had ceded or lived by the civil rights movement and done all the right things, that the culture would follow to a certain extent. There are places that won't and people that won't, but they tend to be ostracized. So if you look at the smoking thing, the government said, okay, you can't smoke in restaurants. And they pushed back. And some restaurants allowed smoking, some restaurants are allowed in smoking in certain areas. But nowadays, nobody allows smoking. And I don't think that's just because there's laws about it. I think because the restaurants realize, I want to make some money. And if I have it smelling like smoke, a lot of people are going to turn away. And it's a slower process. It might not make as many people happy, but I think letting the culture move leads to a better final outcome.
I agree. And if you look at, I'll use as an example, the Hispanic population in the United States is growing and growing and growing. And there was a time, my dad grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, and he talked about what it was like being Hispanic, and not only being Hispanic, but being a Methodist, not a Catholic. And and
you get it from both sides.
Yeah, and so the town's divided right down the middle, and one side are the Hispanics, the other side you have the whites or the Anglos. And so in high school the white girls were off limits, So he had the Hispanic girls, but the Hispanic girls could only date good Catholics, right? And so he had it doubly hard. But now the Hispanic population is really growing in the United States. And can you imagine a company, especially these across America companies, these franchises, like a McDonald's, for example, saying, well, state of Texas says that Hispanics or blacks have to go to their own restaurants. They'd never do that. They'd never open up shop, and money speaks louder than anything. And so I think you're right. And that makes me think of, there's a restaurant that I like to eat at when I go in through Little Rock called Doe's. The original Doe's started out in Greenville, Mississippi. It was owned by a black family, and the food was especially good, and they catered to blacks, and there was a white man who would go and get food there, but he wasn't allowed to go through the front door, so he had to drive around the back and go through the kitchen door to put it in order. But that's how good the food was, and now it's a chain. And to prove your point, I think that eventually we get to where we need to be.
So I'm going to ask a question and postulate something here that I hope it doesn't offend anybody. If we look back at the racial relations and the trends over time, the whole civil rights and who can eat in what side of the restaurant has been revolved around white-black issues. Not so much the Hispanic side, though I'm sure there were rules about that too, but I don't recall any offhand that I've heard about. Having the government come in and force the whole civil rights movement on the private sector, did that help the black-white race relation process through the years? And I would postulate that it appears to have, but I don't know if it really did, because if you look at the Hispanic-white race relations over the years, it was more of a cultural change rather than a dictated government-mandated change. And I think it's been more successful. Now, I think part of it, we've got all the race baiters now that are trying to make us all hate each other. If that was all gone, I think the Hispanic-white relations...
it's interesting. If you go back and you compare what MLK was advocating for, and you look at what Malcolm X was advocating for, and Malcolm X was actually he was basically saying separate but equal.
Until he went to the Muslim world, and he had an eye-opening experience, and he saw that they all got along. Yep, and then he came back, and his followers didn't like that.
No, but he spoke a lot about black people using black bankers, using black insurance agents, using black dry cleaners, using black restaurants, right?
But he wasn't looking for a law. He wanted people to support each other, which I think was a good thing. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think that happens a lot anyway, and sometimes we label as racist what's actually just culture, right? For example, by virtue of being Hispanic, I hang out with a lot of Hispanic people. I eat a lot of Hispanic food. That doesn't make me racist. It's just I'm doing what is familiar to me.
Okay.
On to another subject.
Okay, you know what? We started off with the whole censorship issue, and we sort of detracted from that, so my notes sort of went nowhere on this. But I did bring some books that I'm going to talk about, and the book that I brought for today's show is called Speechless: Controlling Words and Controlling Minds by Michael Knowles, and it's all about censorship. And it focuses on the cultural war aspect of censorship rather than like the the pornography or anything like that. Interesting book. We've got it at the Boerne Bookshop.
All right. Well, that's another great show.
And I think we're going to wrap that up. And thank you, everybody, for listening to us.
We'll see how much Boerne censors when we get done with the editing.
But if you missed any of it, you can always go to BoerneRadio.com and listen to the podcast there or any of our other shows. And we will see you next week.